Rodriguez, president. I am Eduardo Rodriguez, president of the Friends of the American Latino Museum. It's an honor to be with you all here today. We at the American Latino Museum campaign have been doing a lot over the years to drive home the importance of telling our stories, the importance of sharing 500 years of history. And part of that history includes the role of Latinos in every national crisis that we've ever faced. From 9/11, where the Latino community came and helped rebuild important areas of the Pentagon, to Hurricane Katrina, when Latinos went down to help rebuild New Orleans. We have come up time and time again to demonstrate our commitment and our work and our values to support this country in every crisis and rebuilding it to the strength that it has the potential to always exercise. So with that, today we pulled this video conference together to once again highlight untold stories and the untold challenges that our communities face. Many people have heard that COVID-19 has had a disparate impact on our community. The Black and Latino community in particular, heavily hit by this, by COVID-19. And we see it across the board because the Latino community oftentimes is on the front lines. As we look at grocery stores, as we look at farm workers, to look at people in what are deemed essential services that allow our society and our economies to continue to work, we see the Latino community time and time again is there. And so we thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of the amazing participants and speakers that we have today for you. Latinas on the front lines in so many different industries, but championing our community at all levels. So with that, I want to dive right in. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, for joining us. District 16 in Texas, El Paso, a champion for the community on so many issues, and also representing a community that has been heavily hit over the last few years in different ways, and she continues to be a stalwart champion for the community there and across the nation. Congresswoman Escobar, thank you so much for joining us. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. It is really a privilege to be able to spend a little time today talking about these issues and the role that Latinos play in fighting this global pandemic that is just decimating health and decimating the economy. And I want to say to the other great women on the panel, just what a privilege it is for me to be on the same panel and in the same conversation with them. And so I thank them for their incredible work and everything that they're doing. Thank you, Eduardo, for everything you're doing. And you're right, Latinos are on the front lines of this pandemic and are more vulnerable than other folks. And it's something that's not talked about enough. So I'm very grateful for this conversation. Latinos in general, many times in our country, are kind of like the invisible Americans. And the only time that really Latinos make headlines, it seems, is during times like, when what we saw last year, which was Latino migrants who were refugees fleeing from their homeland, seeking asylum in the United States. But we've got to also talk about not just vulnerable Latinos in need, but also we've got to talk about the incredible work and contributions that we make. There's no one who's going to do it for us, so we've got to do it for ourselves. As you mentioned, on the front lines, we are in the grocery stores, we are in the hospitals, in the clinics. We are also in the fields, in the meat packing factories, making sure that Americans are getting, families like ours are getting the food that we need during this crisis. They are the truck drivers. They are the delivery folks, making sure that that food gets to where it needs to be. They are the folks taking our temperature, the nurses, the nurse practitioners, the doctors, you name it. Yet we are unfortunately disproportionately impacted when it comes to the tragedy of the coronavirus. So as an example, 27% of the deaths in this country as a result of coronavirus are Latino deaths, yet we only represent 18% of the country. So we're dying at even higher rates than the rest of the population. And that's because of two reasons. First and foremost, because of the vulnerability that we have in terms of our health. We have underlying conditions that have been generational, difficult to tackle. And number two, socioeconomic challenges like poverty or lack of access to healthcare, lack of a primary care physician. That is definitely true here in El Paso, where we have an 85% of our population is Latino, and yet we live in a state where our state leaders have refused to expand the Affordable Care Act. So we have one of the highest rates of uninsured people in the country. Our state ranks right at the bottom in terms of people with health insurance. And so our communities continue to be really vulnerable to pandemics and disease, but especially to pandemics. You put on top of that the fact that many of our folks are essential workers or work in restaurants, and they have to be out there, yet they don't have health care. They don't have the safety net that the government worked so hard to create, but that unfortunately over the last 3 years has been torn down. So we face some incredible challenges, but it's also so important to recognize the incredible contributions. And I hope that's what we do here in our discussion today.
Thank you. That's exactly what we want to do. And as you were mentioning, in terms of the immigrant community, 37% of immigrants are part of the meat processing industry, 34% are part of the commercial bakeries, 31% fruit and vegetable preserving industry workers, 26% of workers are in the seafood processing that are all immigrants. So clearly they are numbers that aren't shared enough. And as we go to the grocery store and wait in line, the fact that we go in there and the fruits and vegetables are there, you should ask yourself how they got there. And that's right, because they're deemed essential that are in the community and perhaps not receiving the same amount of healthcare services or protections they should, which is why we see the numbers that we're seeing right now in terms of the disparate impact of illness and deaths among the Latino community and the African American community.
And one last thing I'd like to add, Estuardo, before we move on, just because I do serve in Congress, many of us worked really hard to make sure that immigrants and mixed status families were included in relief that was designated by Congress as necessary during this health and economic crisis. But our colleagues on the other side of the aisle literally stripped that from our packages by linking income relief with Social Security numbers. And that was very deliberate, obviously. And I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves as a country, why is it okay that we're reliant on immigrants, including the undocumented, to provide for us so that our families get a meal every single day or 3 square meals every single day, yet we are unwilling to provide them with the benefits that they deserve and unwilling to provide them a path to citizenship. I do want the folks watching at home to know that one of the things I've been working on through the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus is that every member of the undocumented community who is an essential worker should not only be entitled to those benefits, but also be entitled to legalized status.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Obviously, very important issues that we're hopefully going to have Congress take on once we get through this next round of legislation. But those continue to be issues that our country needs to grapple with and hopefully resolve soon. I want to go ahead and pull in a big champion of ours, Diane Guerrero, an amazing talent. You've seen her through Ugly Betty, Jane the Virgin. I'm sorry, Jane the Virgin, and I'm getting my.
I wasn't on Ugly Betty. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, Jane the Virgin. Orange is the New Black. There are so few Latina shows out there that I get them all mixed up in my head. But hopefully, thanks to great talent like yours, we'll continue to see even more programs that depict our stories. Diane, thanks so much for joining us. I was listening to the Congresswoman talk a bit about the essential workers out there. And I have to flag that your book, you've written 2 books about your personal experience and your family's experience. And in that second, most recent book in 2018, you talk about your parents and the work that they did, which sounds very much like the work that we're hearing so many of our community right now on the front lines, essential workers cleaning and working in various industries, 3-4 jobs at a time. Perhaps you might want to elaborate a little bit about your personal experience and your family.
Well, I grew up in a community that, those were most of the jobs that were being done by my parents, by my neighbors, by all my friends' parents. They were working in hospitals, whether they were nurses' assistants or nurses or even cleaning up. When everyone went home, working in restaurants, in factories, picking food. This is all I really saw, and I, including myself, worked in the restaurant industry, and I know what that was like, working for tips. And even though I was a citizen, I know I was working with many undocumented folks who were working every day, and making sure that everyone was taken care of. So, I know I never forget that these essential workers are crucial to our daily lives. We need them to survive. And I think that, what I'm hoping, and with everything that we're doing to elevate these people's voices, our people's voices, I hope that people see how essential we really are, and all the contributions that we're making. And I'm speaking about my community here. And so, obviously some of the things that we need to do is continue talking about these things, and we need to keep fighting to elevate these voices. This is why I love that I'm involved in different organizations that remind me and help me do that every day. I'm working with the ILRC. I'm working with Justice for Migrant Women with Monica Ramirez. I'm working with different orgs to try to elevate these voices every day.
Absolutely. I think we agree, and you've done this so often with other organizations and with ours. Storytelling, sharing these stories is one way that we become advocates and champions. And you have also spoken out a great deal around the detention facilities. What other ways are you looking at, especially now with the quarantining that everyone has to do? There's clearly a different kind of environment for advocacy, but speaking out and telling those stories is so important.
Oh, for sure. Since quarantine, I've tried to elevate the voices of the incarcerated during this time and the detained. I've been working with the ILRC, just bringing attention to people who can't social distance right now, which is a lot of our Black and Brown community, because they are the ones who are mostly detained and incarcerated. We've done it by sharing the stories of people inside. We've urged here in California, Governor Newsom to stop the building of new detention centers. And we've done IG live talks. We've done webinars. We've been calling for social advocacy, like Twitter campaigns, the hashtag Free Them All campaign. We've been promoting live digital events. Basically anything that we can do from home. And I just want to take a second to tell anybody out there who is interested in helping but feels overwhelmed and feels like they can't do anything from home. Well, that's simply not true. I would say just pick one thing a week, or think about one thing, simply one thing a week that you can do to elevate the voices of people who are suffering right now, or find ways that you can also be part of the conversation, or help promote events that help communities like the Farmworker community. I know we're doing a live digital event like Altísimo Live tomorrow, where all the proceeds are going to the Farmworkers Pandemic Relief Fund, and so anyway, things like that. There's so many things that we can do. I wouldn't feel helpless during this time. I think right now we need to think about how we can unite and make sure that we have each other in mind.
Well, that's a perfect segue for us to bring in Monica Ramirez, an incredible Latina herself, who has found many ways to stay busy from quarantine, coming up with new ways to bring attention. And obviously the world of advocacy will never be the same, because what we're learning here is that you could do something from the comfort of your couch. And Monica, thanks for joining us. We've counted on you as a leader in so many different ways and so many different facets of workers' rights. And you've got a big event coming up tomorrow. But before we get into that event, we'd love to just a few words from you on Latinos, the Latinx community on the front lines, and what you're seeing.
Thanks, Eduardo, and thanks for the museum for continuing to lift up the voices of all the Latinx leaders across our country, past, current, and all those who are starting to lay the groundwork for the story of our community that's being written as we speak. And also, I just want to thank Congresswoman Escobar and, of course, Diane for their leadership. It's really an honor to be here. Our work on behalf of the Farmworker community is work that's been longstanding. It is not work that started during this crisis. And what we have known about our community's situation is that, farm workers in our country have been and are vulnerable because we have been denied the most basic employment rights of any other community, of many workers in the United States. And so as someone who comes from a migrant farm worker community, I think it's really important for us to lift up the fact that farm workers and restaurant workers and domestic workers and others who are the frontline workers in this particular crisis are people who have always been doing the work that's foundational for our country to keep going, and unfortunately have not been protected or provided the same benefits. And we're seeing that now have a grave impact on our communities because as people around the country have been sheltered in place, our community continues to go to work. And, the federal government has deemed farm workers essential. Well, we know our community's work has always been essential, but in this moment, the government has now declared it to be so. And the farm worker community is putting its health on the line in order to continue to feed the nation. And I talk about the farm worker community because we know that the overwhelming number of farm workers, the 2 to 3 million farm workers who labor across our nation, are from the Latinx community, just as some of the other workers who are doing frontline work in this moment of crisis are from the Latinx community. And what we're hearing from farm workers and other low-paid workers is that they don't have enough information. They don't have the protective gear that they need to be able to continue doing their job safely. Farm workers in Florida and in California have talked to me about how as they go to work to pick the crops, the fruits and vegetables that we eat, they go home and they have not enough food for their families. And so as you can imagine, for us, as we've been doing our organizing, it's been really heartbreaking to be talking to the farm worker community leaders and members around the nation who are so proud of the work that they're doing and so proud of the way that they're helping in this moment, as many of us are scared and anxious because of the COVID-19 virus. But at the same time, the reality is that they're being carved out of the protections that everyone needs in this moment, and that they don't have food and other necessities. And that's why we're grateful to Congressman Escobar and to all of those who are fighting to make sure that farm workers, other low-paid workers, undocumented workers in every industry are not left behind in this moment as they put their lives in the line for all of us.
Thank you, Monica. We're going to bring Congressman Escobar back up. She may have some response or feedback to what you were just laying out there. But also, we want to bring Diane back. We're going to take some questions from some of the folks that are currently watching this. Before, as we wait for some of those questions to populate, I did want to out here and what we're likely going to be looking at in terms of a CARES Act 4.0 or 5.0, how many other bills might be necessary here, but how are we looking at that, and what are the challenges here that the community not watching might be able to support?
The next CARES package is going to be really tough to pass. And I think a lot of folks have been talking about it in the media about the fact that, getting emergency funding that's very specific was easier because the next CARES package, many of us are going to try to make sure that we help people who were not helped, people who were excluded, and that we begin to think about ways to stabilize things as the country begins to slowly come out of the peak of its crisis. And that crisis is different for every state and every community, but you see the country starting to move back to a gradual reopening. So many of us, we're working through in different ways. We're working through the committees, because the committees are the ones that are going to be helping shape this. We're also working through our caucuses. I'm a member of the Hispanic Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. I'm very privileged to be a part of the Speaker's leadership team, to be one of the freshman representatives. And so I've raised with my caucuses, the two caucuses, and with leadership. There was a really, really great New York Times piece, this is weeks ago now, that talked about migrant farm workers who were deemed essential workers, but at the same time were afraid of being out and about because they're vulnerable to deportation. And so I raised this with our leadership team and with the caucuses, and I said, this is a moment where we have, we've been fighting very much for the most vulnerable Americans and vulnerable immigrants, but this really, we have to be inclusive of the people who are so essential. Let a light shine on the fact that many of these essential workers need our protection because they've been there for us. And so those requests have been incorporated into everything that we're working on for CARES 2. We're hoping that we have something to vote on next week. But things are still kind of up in the air. DC is still a hot spot. I'm afraid that other communities in Texas, after we've reopened, are going to become hot spots, et cetera. So we're playing it by ear, but even though we're not in DC, in fact, and just like I would say in 30 minutes, I have a conference call with the Democratic caucus. So we continue to work. We're continuing to shape these pieces of legislation, and members of the caucus and myself are going to keep fighting for the vulnerable.
And it sounds like Congress is going to take a long time to get back to that normal routine of having people come to the Hill and visit and lobby on different issues. So getting creative around advocacy is going to be very important for us. I know Diane has joined us on Capitol Hill advocating for the Latino Museum in years past. So sorry, Diane, we won't be able to have you come up to DC. But how do you think, Diane, you are going to look at advocating with legislators, talking about some of these policy issues moving forward, understanding that we can't just host a press conference like we used to, or going door knocking on Capitol Hill anymore. Have you all thought about that any further as these issues continue to cause a lot of pressure and strain on the Latino community?
No, I feel like we're all sort of just playing it by ear for now. I think that communicating in this way it is quite effective. I'm hoping to see more of this. I'm certainly comfortable communicating in this way. I think you're right. We are going to have to get more creative. And I think that as time goes by, we're going to be learning more from each other and learning how to do this, because obviously we're not comfortable sitting in the sidelines and just letting our community fall behind when it comes to these issues. We are still very much here and ready to fight for our rights and for the protections that our community deserves.
And before we bring in our board chairman, I also wanted to highlight resources that are available, and perhaps among the three of you, there are some resources you'd like to share, because we know that the Latino community, in particular Latina entrepreneurs, were a pre-COVID driving force local economies, generating revenue as well as creating new employment. And now, obviously, there's a program there to help, but we understand that there are a smaller amount of Latino businesses that are receiving that kind of support from the PPP. And I was wondering if there are any resources you all might have to share. We could start with the Congresswoman, if there are some additional resources that Latino business owners can look into to kind of survive weather this storm.
Absolutely. We also, in addition to the PPP, and you're right, Estuardo, we specifically carved out $60 billion. And that was a big fight with our counterparts on the Republican side. But we wanted a carve out for small business owners, minority business owners, women business owners, veteran-owned businesses, et cetera, so that the folks that we call the underbanked, people who don't have these longstanding big relationships with the big banks. We wanted small credit unions, community banks, the very organizations that are tied to the community to have access to that money specifically so that our folks would have access to that economic lifeline. There's also the SBA emergency loans, the EIDL loans, that I would really encourage folks to look at. There are small business development centers in most American communities. The one we have here in El Paso is incredible, really super helpful to the small businesses, especially minority-owned businesses. And as we're talking about resources, Estuardo, I do want to just, I know we're focused on business resources. I do want to say something because we had a mental health town hall, telephone town hall last week. There's a lot of families who are under a lot of stress. I want everyone to know that the resources for mental health, resources on domestic violence, on protective orders, in every community, those resources are still up and running and available. Please reach out if you need help.
Thank you. Thank you. And similarly, Monica or Diane, if you have resources, other platforms that people can tap into, I welcome your thoughts on that now before we move on to the next segment.
Sure. So, well, I think that as we wait to see what's going to happen in Congress in terms of extending additional benefits and support to all of our community members, it's important for folks to know that there have been various funds that have been established to help support people who need additional resources in this moment. So Justice for Migrant Women, my organization with Hispanics in Philanthropy, created a Farmworkers Pandemic Relief Fund to get aid to the farmworker community. And if people go to our website, justiceforwomen.org, they'll be able to find information there. The National Domestic Workers Alliance has created a fund, and there are a number of other funds that have been created to support workers, undocumented workers, and other community members in this moment. The other thing I wanted to lift up is that our good friends and partners at LULAC have created resources on COVID in Spanish. So I highly recommend that people check out their website to learn more about some of those resources. And then, you know, with my other hat on with the Latinx House that I'm a co-founder of, and we've also been sharing out some information related to some funds that artists and content creators can apply for, since they also, many of them have lost work during this crisis. So I hope that people will also see those additional resources as something that can help them and their families during this time.
Well, we want to make sure to uplift that content to the Facebook page, and we'll share those resources with everyone. Diane, was there anything you wanted to add before we move?
Yeah, well, in addition to the Farm Workers Pandemic Relief Fund, which I've been working with Monica Ramirez on. I'm sorry, I said your last name, like you're right there. With Monica on. I have another friend who is a trans activist who just is working on another fund, another campaign, the You Are Essential campaign, and that's a social impact campaign and national relief fund that awards grants to grassroots organizations and mutual aid networks working directly with vulnerable communities who are affected by COVID. It's just another campaign that I'm working on, and I'm just trying to help elevate all of my community in these times. So I would suggest that one too if you're interested.
Thank you, and of course we'd be more than happy to share all that information and where people can get more data and how they can help through our Facebook page and as well as through other social media platforms. I wanted to segue here to continue talking about the positive and leadership role, have a Latinx community on the front lines by inviting our board chairman, Daniel Vargas, also a former commissioner on the Congressional Commission to study the viability of the American Latino Museum. Daniel Vargas, thank you for being such a great friend and champion for the Latino Museum. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about this great leadership role that the Latino community has.
Absolutely. And thank you, Estuardo, and thank you, everyone, for participating, both our speakers as well as those that are watching us live right now. Our effort has been primarily focused on making sure that the general public recognizes the fact that Latinos have been contributing greatly to this nation since its beginning and since even before its founding. For over 500 years, Latinos have been helping to found and settle communities throughout the American territory. In fact, we fought in every single war that this country has ever had. So for over 500 years, we've been relying on Latinos to fight our wars and to run our businesses, to tend our fields and to mend our wounds, to teach our kids, patrol our streets, write our laws, and to share the word of God. And that goes on to this day. We know that we're on the front lines of making sure that the American public remains safe and healthy and fed. And in fact, those disparities that we heard about earlier are evident in every local community throughout the country. For example, where I live in Fairfax County in Virginia, Latinos make up about 17% of the population, but we're over 52% of the COVID-19 cases. So that's evidence of the fact that we are in very risky professions. We're in professions where we're exposed to the public in great ways. We've got to make sure that we're recognizing the contributions that we continue to make to this country every single day. As a result of that, we wanted to make sure that we had an effort as part of our museum mission to tell the story of Latinos in this country. Where in the coming days, we're going to be rolling out an initiative called Latinos Making a Difference, LMD, where we'll be hearing stories or seeing stories about folks that are in leadership roles as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, our everyday heroes that are on the front lines that are making a difference. Everything from stories like Chef Jose Andres, who's fed millions of people through his World Central Kitchen, a businesswoman in Missouri that has retooled her manufacturing plant to make masks for healthcare workers and saving their lives, to the administrator of the Small Business Administration, Jovita Carranza, who's leading the charge to make sure that our small business community remains live and vital to our economy, to a nurse in Minnesota who took it upon herself to get in her car and drive to New York City to help during the healthcare crisis in New York. So if you have stories to tell about Latinos making a difference right now during the COVID-19 crisis, go to our website, AmericanLatinoMuseum.org, go to the Connect tab and let us know your story. And there are so many other organizations that are doing a wonderful job. Mark Madrid and the Stanford Latino Entrepreneur Initiative, Claudia Romo Edelman with her Hispanic Star Initiative. There are so many things that are happening right now in our community where we can highlight where we're making a difference and highlight where we need help. So I encourage everyone to stay involved, to stay active, and to help where you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for lifting up those stories. It's important that we, again, continue to highlight the role of Latinos and Latinas on the front lines here to make sure that our community gets through and that our nation gets through. With that, I wanted to introduce Sonia Diaz, the founding executive director, the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative. Sonia, you're wonderful to join us today. Clearly, a lot of information you all are diving through to help paint the picture on where our community is on the front lines, as well as the challenges that we're facing. Sonia.
Thanks so much, Estuardo, and thanks to the American Latino Museum and to Diane and Monica and Representative Veronica Escobar. I'm so sorry for that. We're so thoughtful right now about what it is that data and facts can impart as we seek to both ensure people are not sick, are not dying, and are not economically devastated. So at UCLA, we've been assessing data as it relates to health. And something just came out today that was absolutely terrible. And that was Latinos and Blacks have death rates that are about twice as high as that as their white counterparts in New York City, more than twice as high in Utah, and 3.5 times as high in California, where I live. And so this pandemic, the coronavirus global pandemic, has really shone a spotlight on inequality that stems from a broken social safety net and inadequate access to things that are necessary not only in a pandemic, but also in post and pre-pandemic life, which is healthcare, a living wage, shelter, access to food. And so I'm so glad that we're here talking about the role of workers, especially essential workers, which data shows are overwhelmingly those people that are people of color, that are Latinos, that are immigrants, that are poor working class Americans, who are doing everything in their power to keep America safe at a time when they don't have full access to healthcare because they either are not covered by insurance or don't live close to a hospital or don't have a doctor that speaks in their native tongue, that are struggling to survive. It's really put a spotlight on this idea of a fight for 15, a fight for benefits. These are people that are delivering our packages, checking us out at the grocery store, and people like my mother who work the fields in places like California and Texas. And so we're really at a place right now to think through, how do we want to move forward as a country, knowing that Latinos are going to be front and center for any recovery efforts? And just fast facts, Estuardo, Latinos in 2019 were responsible for powering $2.9 trillion into the American economy. Latinos in the US for 5 years have had positive shares in home ownership. And so now as we're dealing with this terrible pandemic, questions about how do we keep people safe, how do we keep them fed, how do we keep them housed, and how do we keep them cared for are things that are top of mind for all of us.
All right, now the microphone is on. Apologize. I was just saying we should bring Danny back on as a former chamber president himself. The important role of our community as a revenue generators, not just locally but nationally. Danny, I know that you had a great deal of experience in that, and looking at right now how the businesses have been impacted so greatly. And what that might mean moving forward in trying to rebuild local economies.
You know, that's exactly right. And we all know that the vast majority of new jobs created in this country are created by small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. So we've got to do everything we can to make sure that small businesses are able to continue to thrive and grow and compete in our economy. Fortunately, the PPP program exists primarily for small businesses, but they don't always have the right access to be able to get to those sources of income. So we encourage everyone to be able to go to the SBA.gov website, go to their local lenders, seek out resources to be able to help you through the SCORE program, to be able to apply for those loans so that our small businesses can stay functioning during this crisis. Our hope is that our economy will slowly begin to open back up in a reasonable, responsible way. And we can do everything we can to shop local and make sure that we're supporting our local business community as we begin to open up our economy. Keep doing everything you can to support your small business community in this country.
And Sonia, you raised a couple of points. I was wondering, though, as we look at the unique challenges that mixed status families face, I know Monica and Diane and the Congressman were also mentioning some of the challenges. But what are you seeing are particular or unique challenges that mixed status families are facing?
Yeah, this is a really important moment for us as a country and the way that we construct policy. Either we're going to continue to leave people out purposefully, as the representative mentioned, that she was fighting along with her peers to ensure that the essential workers who are keeping us safe actually had benefits, for which they didn't. So it wasn't a matter of just taxpayers, people that are paying income tax, sales tax being excluded because of immigration status, but it was mixed status families, kids, spouses, and other relatives. And frankly, that's just unacceptable. There are some places that are doing right by this. And what we see in California is a special program to ensure that undocumented workers, although it's finite, it's a start, have access to benefits. We also see things that are really important. We haven't brought this up, and I see it in the comments, which is schools and children. they're hungry. And many people relied, just like Monica was talking about, how we have farmers and farm workers that are picking crops to feed not only this country, but this world, and they don't have food on their table. So in California, there was a very innovative program to provide $300 debit cards to families, irrespective of anything. All you have to do is have a kid that was eligible for free or reduced lunch in school. These are the things that people need right now. What our research is showing is that national polls have already said that more than 65% of Latinos polled have said that they have suffered a loss of income or significant reduction in their work. Now, these are not people who were thriving before. Our social safety net is really only safe for some, and it's incumbent on all of us to think through how we can maximize and operationalize what President Obama said last week, which is genuine opportunity. And I want to see genuine opportunity for our essential workers.
Thank you, Sonia. I want to make sure we have some time for some questions. We did ask as you flagged, Sonia, some of the comments on the thread here. One of the questions I'm seeing here is about pipeline programs. I know, Danny, you had talked in particular about healthcare needs here, but clearly making sure that there is culturally competent and linguistically capable professionals that are serving our community. In addition to not having the healthcare resources we need, we also know that sometimes the hospitals and facilities don't have the culturally competent staff to take care of Spanish dominant communities. Sorry, Danny?
No, I think you're right. I think action needs to be taken at every level of government, at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, to make sure that we have access to resources, to documentation, to programs that our community is in need of, so that it's not just a question of language, it's also a question of being able to reach into these communities to make sure that they are aware of the services that are available to them. You know, secondly, we need to make sure that our medical professionals and our healthcare system is spun up and adequately, prepared to support the needs of our community, which in many cases is different. We have some incumbent morbidities associated with our community that are really making the COVID crisis even greater for our community. So they need to be prepared to take that on and ensure that as we present ourselves with increased cases of diabetes and hypertension and asthma and so forth, these types of comorbidities that really have an impact on COVID-19, our medical system needs to be prepared to deal with that.
Thank you, Danny. Clearly a lot for our community to do. Sonia, you're going to continue to provide more in-depth research from the Institute. What are the other areas that you all are looking at as it relates to the Latino community in this crisis?
Yeah, the election. We're thinking about how are we going to right the wrongs of policy that leaves people out, and we have a huge opportunity in terms of the 2020 election. That said, many scientists are recognizing that there likely is to be a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic this fall, which is really going to jeopardize the capacity of people to wait in long lines in small areas from Wisconsin to California to Texas and Florida in order to cast a ballot. And we know that there's already been an assault on voting rights, and we know that the Latino electorate has been growing and is powerful. So one of the things that UCLA we're focused on is how do we ensure that there's safe access to the ballot box? And not surprising, there's an alternative, which is vote by mail, which has been deemed both safe, accessible, fair, and not fraudulent. So we want to ensure that all Latino voters and all Americans are able to cast a ballot without having to choose between their life and their fundamental right to participate in our electoral democracy. So I think, honestly, the vote in this election are paramount, and it's going to happen no matter what. We just need to make sure that investment is driven in Latino voters in Texas, Arizona, Georgia, and Florida, and elsewhere, and that all Americans are not going to have to stand in lines like they did in Wisconsin when there's a safe alternative to continue to be healthy during this deathly pandemic.
I know we're going to lose Congresswoman Escobar momentarily, but I did want to follow what you just said there. Sonia, even in this crisis, democracy and the work of democracy must continue. Civic participation is more critical today than ever before. As Danny mentioned, so much of what needs to get done is going to be based on our leadership and our voices. Congresswoman, how are you also looking at the civic participation challenge that we all have before we let you go? Because I know you've got a tight calendar today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Estuardo. And as I prepare to sign off, I again just want to thank you for this incredible conversation. I want to thank everyone who participated, both on the panel and watching on Facebook. And yes, exactly what Sonia mentioned, which is we've got an election coming up in November that is very important. You know, Latinos have historically had very low voter turnout. And if we don't use our voices, somebody else will use theirs. And so we've got to participate. It has been very, very hard as a member of Congress who is used to having regular in-person town hall meetings, used to being out and about with the community at, you know, in neighborhoods, with Rotary clubs, with all sorts of groups. It's been really challenging for me, because that's how I get my marching orders, is from the community. That's how I communicate what's coming up and make sure that people have information so that they feel connected to what's happening in Washington. We have substituted those in-person events with telephone town hall meetings, and they've been really incredible. We've had upwards of 5,000-6,000 people on our telephone town hall meetings, and we're starting to have very specific town hall meetings, whereas our first few telephone town halls during the kind of the early days of the lockdown were focused on just getting information about the CARES package out, about unemployment benefits, how to apply, about the stimulus checks, answering those questions that people are still asking today. We then transitioned to having more specific town hall meetings. We had a telephone town hall meeting specific to small businesses, one that was specific to for mental health, so that people could call in and speak to therapists and professionals, lawyers, et cetera, about challenges and issues that they're facing. I have literally hourly meetings with stakeholders, whether they be nonprofits or federal law enforcement agencies or our military base here in El Paso, Fort Bliss, just hour after hour after hour of talking with folks. Number one, so that I can know what's happening, but number two, so that people can influence the process. I would encourage everybody participating in this Facebook forum to reach out to your member of Congress and reach out to your senator and push your issues. I mentioned just a little while ago the challenge that we're going to have in passing a CARES 2 package that is just and fair and inclusive. Well, those of us in Congress who share these values, we're going to work our tails off to do that. But we need you all at home to push what you want to see in that. You hold us accountable. Call us, talk to us, tell us what you demand of us, what you want us to be doing, not just on your behalf, but on behalf of the vulnerable all around us. This is our government. This is our process. We need you to be a part of it. And in November, you've got to make sure that you don't stay home. There's just too much at stake.
Very important for everyone to take that to heart as the clock is ticking. Congress needs to move through legislation. This is a critical election year. So much for folks to do. So thank you, Congressman, for highlighting how constituents can be in touch with their members of Congress, as you are setting a great example. With that, I know that we're going to lose you, Congresswoman. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here and sharing your wise words.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all very much. Take care. Stay safe.
I want to go back to Diane Guerrero and Monica Ramirez, as it sounds like they have a huge event coming on tomorrow that I want to make sure we plug, talk a little bit more about that and what goes, where the fundraising effort is going, and then what people can expect before we take a few more questions and wrap up this great conversation. Shall we start with you, Monica?
Great. Yes. Thank you. Hi, Sonia. It's nice to see you. And Danny. So tomorrow, iHeartMedia and Retro Pop Media have planned an event, a live stream event with Work From Home Network TV. And they chose the Farmworkers Pandemic Relief Fund to be the beneficiary of this live stream benefit that they're doing. So we're very grateful to them for that, because, we have set a $3 million goal for our fund to try to get basic resources to the farm worker community to meet basic needs, including food and diapers and formula and things of that nature. So through the work of many people in a very short amount of time, there's been a lineup of incredible folks like Diane and many others who have signed up to help support the effort. And so, from about 1 o'clock Eastern time until later into the evening, there's going to be performances and speakers. And, and because for us, we wanted to make sure that the farm worker community would be represented from the beginning of the show and throughout the day. So there will be farm worker community leaders from around the country who will be joining live. Some have submitted video diaries and have been in conversation with some of the individuals who are going to be participating in the show, singers and others. So we're very, very grateful for this event to have been put together. And in terms of where the funds are going, as of right now, 25 different ally organizations who are poised to get aid out on the ground have been selected. Their reach is collectively about 30 states across the country, including Puerto Rico. These groups have already received resources from the Pandemic Relief Fund that we've raised to date. But following tomorrow's event, we hope to be able to provide more resources from the fund to be able to get more aid out. And we believe that this is going to be allocated in a series of rounds of funding, because we know that this is the early part of the crisis for the farm worker community during peak season from June to September. That's when we believe that we're going to be seeing more cases of COVID in the farm worker community as people are living in labor camps. And so we see that there will be great need very soon as outbreaks and community spread happen in the farm worker community. And then, of course, we're looking forward to the recovery process and making sure that we have resources in place to help the farm worker community with the recovery after this is over hopefully in the next few months.
Thank you, Monica. Diane, is this just one of many from the couch kind of fundraisers you're going to be participating, or can you talk to us a little bit more about this new world of fundraising from the couch?
Look, I mean, any way that we can do it. So yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in continuing this work alongside my community. I hope to continue getting more creative and partnering with so many people in my community that are doing this work, who are interested in the betterment of our community. I think that everything that has been said during this conversation has been so important. I've learned so much. I continue to learn every day. And this is the time where we all really need to get together and learn as much as we can from each other and understand what is hurting our community and what is going to benefit our community, and so that we can be involved. And even from our couch, we can make a huge, huge difference. So I think this is just a time to get motivated. Nowhere else to go. So
Right.
I say get fired up, because this is the time where you see these great inequalities and who is really being affected. So yeah, I encourage you to join and be here with us.
Absolutely. Now is absolutely the time to get fired up and come together. I understand the slate tomorrow, Monica, is huge. You've got celebrities from all areas of entertainment, from the Latino community, the Latinx community, singing or making, just providing some comments. I saw, Diane, in your book that you also were training to sing when you were in Boston. So I don't know if you're going to be singing at any time, but
I'll be debuting my song. No. Yeah, that'll come out in my one woman show when that will happen. My one person show.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there will be
awesome.
some surprises. There's some surprises in store for tomorrow, but I just want to thank you, Eduardo and Danny, for lending your support to the event. That we appreciate your partnership, and we really do need to get the word out, not just about what's happening to the farm worker community, but also, as you're doing today, by helping to lift up how the rest of our community is being impacted and the kind of support that we all need in this moment.
Thank you. Well, I want to be respectful of people's time and wrap this up nicely. The reminder here is that the American Latino Museum campaign continues, and we feel that it's more important now than ever because these are stories that are not told. If we're not out there insisting, like our dear friends Veronica and Diane and the Congresswoman and so many others out there, if we're not sharing those stories, they can be at risk of forgotten. That's why ultimately one day, American Latino Museum on our national mall, where 30 million tourists come every year, not from around the country, but from around the world, they need to be able to go into a building like the African American Museum of Culture and History that tells all of the story, the full and more complete story of our nation, so that we can not only be proud, but inspire generations to come. And so with that, thank you, Diane, Monica, Sonia, Congresswoman Escobar, our wonderful board chairman, Danny Vargas, for your amazing leadership, your thoughtfulness, and hopefully we'll continue to see more great things and be supportive as a community of everything that we're driving forward.
Thank you, everyone.
One last thing, don't forget it's census year. Don't forget to fill out your census this year and be counted.
That's right. That's right. Go around. Any last word?
Yeah, I mean, I really take to heart what Diane was saying about getting fired up and Monica reminding us that farm workers have always been doing this work and have been excluded. That's purposeful. So our goal together is not to just get through the pain of the pandemic, but to really reimagine what this country can look like, knowing that Latinos play an outsized role. We're the future workforce, and we need to be included, recognized, and I think that the efforts to collect these stories are so powerful and so important. But I think more than that, we really need to position ourselves, and I'm thankful for the leadership that we have in the US Congress and elsewhere, leadership that's brave and courageous and righteous, and so excited to be a part of that. But I hope everybody stays safe. I know that this is just a nightmare for so many.
Great. Here, I co-sign on all of that. And I also want to say that just as we lift up our communities and educate people about what needs to be done in this moment to make sure that we're safe and healthy, we have to bring in our allies, and we need our allies to help tell the stories of our community as well, and to work with us to make change for the benefit, not just of the Latino community, but for this entire country.
And I'll just lastly end by saying, part of our mission as a museum initiative is to make sure that we're looking into the past to tell the stories of the contributions that we've made over the last 500 years. It's also about inspiring future generations, but it's also about telling the great stories that are happening today. We are living through a very historic moment right now as a nation, and our community is making a great difference on the ground, on the front lines, in every single aspect of American society, making sure that our country remains healthy, safe, clean, and fed, and let's support everything that we're doing. And thank you all for your support. Thank you all very much.
Diane, you get the last word.
Oh no, I just want to say I love you all. Thank you so much for never leaving us alone. And for just fighting for us and always caring for us. And I want to say that I love my community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll continue to share this throughout the week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We love you too, Diane.
Oh, thank you.